Hello, folks. Welcome back to another episode of Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast on LettermenRow.com. I am Jeremy Birmingham, joined as usual by Spencer Holbrook, our do everything extraordinaire, whatever else you want to call him. You can come up with your own adjective, Spencer. It's a busy weekend for Ohio State. We'll just dive right in. The biggest news, of course, is Ohio State receiving its running back commitment in the class of 2020, Miyan Williams, the former Iowa State commitment, as we talked about last week. If he visited Ohio State, it was only a matter of time until he committed to the Buckeyes, and it took him about 2 hours after his visit to do that.
Was it 2 hours? I didn't even think it was 2 hours. It was more like, I'm assuming it was probably right after the game ended. If he put it out on social media 2 hours, I'm assuming it was a little earlier than that even.
Yeah, I mean, he told me by the time he told me on Saturday night and confirmed it to me, he was home in Cincinnati, back in celebrating with his family. So clearly, it was a visit that was designed with the commitment in mind. It was get into town, see the game, make sure it was what he thought it was going to be, and leave committed, because this was an unofficial visit. The plan heading into the trip was to return for an official visit at some point down the line, and he still will. But now it's to do that as a committed player. And, for people that are not sure, they see the 3-star, they see the number 18 ranked player in Ohio, they see the 43rd ranked running back in the country, and all those things are, valuable on their own. But the reality here is that Ohio State has been interested in Miyan Williams for quite some time. There are a handful of people inside of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center who were very pro Miyan Williams for a while. And, they see a player, one of the comparisons I got for him was Carlos Hyde. I don't know if you've watched the film, but what do you see out of Williams, in this cycle? And why do you think he's the right fit for the Buckeyes?
I think he's a bruiser, and I think they already have a guy like Marcus Crowley who can be a shifty guy. They already have a guy who can be kind of another bruiser like Master Teague. Obviously, we think J.K. Dobbins is going to enter the NFL draft after this. So I think to add another bruiser and to be able to have another guy who, with a little bit of development, can become like a Carlos Hyde. There were a couple of complimentary backs there with Carlos Hyde as well. So I don't know if he'll be a feature back early in his career or if he'll be kind of like what Master Teague is right now for J.K. Dobbins, but I think he brings a lot to the table. And first and foremost, he's a big guy. I mean, We talked about that when we saw him yesterday. He's a big guy. Yeah, and I think that sticks out more than anything.
I really think that he's similar in my mind to like Mike Weber. I think that may be a better comparison than Carlos Hyde, just because I think that the body type, Carlos ended up, he's a little taller. Where I think what Ohio State will have to do with Mayon is actually probably get him to shed a few pounds. He's listed at 5'10", 210 pounds, but I'm telling you, from when we saw him on Saturday at Ohio Stadium, I'd be shocked if he was more than 5'9", and probably closer to 215 or 220. He definitely looked stout. He looked like a guy that is going to be a hit the hole between the tackles and run hard type of guy. And like I said, the comparison I got for him was Carlos Hyde from somebody in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. But I was also told he's a tough ass, whatever that means. So I mean that he's a hard runner, and for Ohio State, for this offense, for what they want to do in the future with quarterbacks that can move and rely a little bit on the read option stuff, but really what they want to do is be a power run team with a wide open passing attack. I think he's a good fit. So he's in the class, and naturally what that makes people wonder and think about is, okay, what happens now with the running back? Are they done? Does Jahmyr Gibbs, stay on the board? Does Miyan Williams be the only guy? Do they still chase Bijan Robinson? Do they blah, 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 blah? You know what I mean? Like, there's so many questions.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions, and if you're Ohio State, you have to take Bijan Robinson if he wants it. And if he wants into the class, he's one of those guys, and we've talked about it so many times. If he wants in the class, he's going to be a part of the class. He's the Elias Ricks type player. He's the program shifting player. If he wants in the class, you will take him in the class.
Yeah, absolutely.
However, I think they can be done at running back and be perfectly fine. I think they know what they have in Master Teague. They know what they have coming up in Marcus Crowley. They know that Steel Chambers can potentially be a guy to help that running back room down the road. And now you add Miyan Williams into this mix, and you're looking kind of full at running back when you thought for a while you were going to be thin there. So I don't think you really have to reach anywhere. You definitely don't have to reach anywhere. You're not going to take a guy that doesn't fit Ohio State just for the sake of, okay, we need 2 running backs. But you also don't necessarily need another one because your running back stable might be a little more crowded than you thought it could have been.
Well, that's really where this whole thing started in the summer. The question was, who is going to take over at running back? Because they obviously have thought that J.K. Dobbins would be departing after the season for a while. There was question marks about Master Teague because of his health issues, and they just weren't sure really what they had with him. And then there was Marcus Crowley and Steel Chambers, and they weren't sure what are these guys going to turn into. And they've been so pleased by both of them and the development of Crowley and Steel Chambers that it makes it much easier to look at the class and say to themselves, well, wait a second, maybe we don't need a second. But
they're already in a scholarship pinch, so you don't have to reach and take a second running back. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then you still have Demario McCall on the roster too. I mean, there's still things that can happen for Ohio State from here. But what you did say that's accurate 100% is if Bijan Robinson wants in the class for Ohio State, he is going to be welcomed in with open arms. I don't think that that's going to happen. I don't think that Bijan Robinson is a player that is going to end up coming back around to the Buckeyes. So I was told that, basically right now there's a holding pattern between him and Ohio State. And what that means is that the Buckeyes are just there. They're letting Bijan know, hey, we're interested. We're here for you if you're interested. But as he told Ari Wasserman of The Athletic, who went out and saw him 2 weeks ago or whatever, I'm not going anywhere unless Tom Herman's fired. So, I mean, if you take the kid at his word, which you should, then that's where you are.
There's only one person that can tell the truth, and it's the person that it's coming from, And as long as Tom Herman's fired, which Texas is 6-5 right now, if they go 6-6, nothing's going to surprise me. I'm assuming stones are going to be left unturned. I can't see Tom Herman getting fired, therefore I cannot see Bijan Robinson leaving. But the fact that they are just kind of holding out hope, waiting that he comes to Ohio State, tells you everything you need to know about how talented they believe Bijan Robinson is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think that Tom Herman ends up losing his job, even if they lose out this season. I do think that Tim Beck and Stan Drayton, two of the other offensive coaches, may be in peril. But, I don't know. Maybe they hold on to Drayton because he's such a key part of the Robinson recruitment. Maybe they hold on to Beck because he's the guy that really opened the door in Arizona. I'm more likely, and I'm inclined to think that they would be more likely to keep Drayton over Beck, but we'll see. None of that matters to Ohio State, really. If Tom Herman's there, that's what Bijan Robinson's going to do, is stick it out. So, at this point,
a lot of Ohio State familiarity there, Birm.
Yeah, I mean, obviously those are three names Buckeyes fans should know. So let's move on. We've talked about the running backs. We'll talk about the other big 2020 visitor from the weekend, which was Xavier Carlton, the 6'7", 260-pound defensive end from Utah. He's a player that I think is really interesting. When he walked out of the tunnel yesterday, it sort of looked like a 23-year-old NFL rookie walking up the tunnel instead of a high school senior.
Yeah, he's a big kid, and you're right. He looks like he's pretty filled out. I don't know. Obviously, he's going to be able to be put to good use in the Ohio State weight room, but it looks like he's already been there for a couple of years, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's very rare to see those types of kids who look like they're so physically college ready. And Xavier Carlton certainly looked at. What's interesting about him is he's a guy who moved to Utah this year for his senior season. He played in San Diego for the first 3 years of high school. Still sort of under the radar, but yet, I mean, he's an Army All-American, an All-American, not an Army All-American, an Adidas All-American. He's got offers from pretty much everybody on the West Coast. He's still interested in Oregon, Washington, Utah. And Ohio State's just sort of been plugging along for the last few months. And I wrote about it in Sunday's Dotting the I's, but Larry Johnson's methodology is so different, I think, than a lot of coaches, and so patient and calm that you don't ever really know if Ohio State's even in the mix for these kids. And then all of a sudden you see Jaden McKenzie last year, committing on signing day. And I think that there's a possibility that Xavier Carlton sort of works out the same way. From what I was told, talking to people around the program on Sunday morning, there is like a surge of confidence that Ohio State could be the team to beat here. But there is also like cautious optimism because they think once he goes and makes his other visits to Washington, maybe Oregon, Cal, the push to stay closer to home is probably what's going to win out in the end here. So you just have to wonder, like, does the kid win? Does his visit, and it was a very short visit. He arrived Friday night, left early Sunday morning. So basically like a 30-hour trip. Is that enough for Ohio State to win it? And there's sort of mixed messages coming out of the Buckeyes camp about it. But one thing that you do know is that right now, if it's going to be another defensive lineman in the class of 2020, it's going to be Carlton or it's going to be Tyler Barron.
Yeah, and I don't think Tyler Barron is as big of a possibility as Carlton is, just because Tyler Barron's father with Tennessee and yada yada yada. Everybody knows that by now from reading you. But Carlton is kind of interesting because Larry Johnson, Ohio State needs a defensive lineman in this class, right? And they need a running back in this class. Everyone panicked about the running back, but everybody knows to just stay calm, keep calm, and let Larry Johnson do his work on the recruiting trail, because Larry Johnson kind of works miracles. I don't want to use the word miracle too lightly, but you think Ohio State's dead in the rights and not going to land a defensive end or defensive tackle when they need one, 2 weeks to signing day, and you're saying, oh, we still need to fill that. And they're saying, oh, we still need to fill that position there. We still need to get a defensive tackle. We still need to get a defensive end. And then Larry Johnson says, don't worry, I got you. And he kind of just, has one for you. And Jaden McKenzie, like you said, was the example last year. And it looks like Xavier Carlton could end up being that this year. And, what do you always say? Carr, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's comfort in relationship.
Larry Johnson builds comfort with players, and he builds relationship with players. And if that doesn't win, then it's usually proximity to home that wins.
Yeah, and here the thing is with Larry, what makes him so unique is you look at like the current defensive line, right? Devon Hamilton, Robert Landers, these are guys that people didn't think were going to amount to anything. And then, they just stick around, and all of a sudden he turns them into really good defensive linemen because he's the best defensive line coach in America.
He turns Devon Hamilton into a borderline All-American, right? I mean, you've seen what Devon Hamilton's been able to do, and obviously he's a fifth year, so Mickey Marotti has had a lot to do with that. But, I mean, Larry, you can't not give credit to Larry Johnson for that. 5 years working with him and 5 years working with Coach Mick, and I think you're going to be a pretty dominant force in the middle, right?
Yeah, it's really remarkable. And again, I don't know that there's a huge push right now, or maybe not push is the right word, maybe a huge concern for Ohio State, because they've added 2 defensive linemen in the last week that they didn't know that they were going to have moving into this offseason, with Cade Stover making the move to defensive end, and then the announcement that Jonathan Cooper was going to redshirt and return for his fifth season.
Yeah, that's quite the haul, right? You get Cade Stover, a 4-star linebacker that was a borderline defensive end anyways, and then Jonathan Cooper, who had a chance to be first-team All-Big Ten this year, and you say, okay, Coach, I'm coming back, and now you've got a all Big Ten type of defensive end coming into your 2020 recruiting class that's already ready to play in the NFL if he wants to.
Right. Cooper was a 5-star in the class of 2016. Getting him back is huge. It does provide a little bit of a buffer for the 2020 class. And if they don't end up landing Xavier Carlton or Tyler Barron, things are still going to be okay. And they'll focus on 2021. And that's what I want to turn our focus to, because the 2021 visitor list for the weekend that was a monster list, especially on the defensive line. The biggest names at the defensive end position did not make it, and that's the key. Damian Robinson from Maryland and Monkel Goodwin from Maryland didn't make the trip for whatever reason. It's a long drive, weather, that kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean that they didn't have a lot of good players there. Especially guys like Jason Anye, Aaron Armitage, Michael Hall from Streetsboro. I think those are the main defensive line, but those guys are all sort of, raw. And that's one thing that Larry Johnson really likes, is guys that he can sort of develop. But I want to talk for you. Is there, again, this is where I like to throw it to you as the voice of the fan and the recruit, Nick. Is there a guy or two from this weekend that you're like, oh, Jeremy, what's the deal with this guy?
Well, Anya was pretty interesting. I mean, when he walked out of the tunnel, he was another guy where I said to myself, wow, that's a big kid. And I mean, he's only a junior in high school. Armitage, another one. When you see these guys, Ohio State is recruiting these not really prototypical defensive tackles anymore. They're just recruiting big defensive linemen. Yeah. I want to say it's very different from a lot of like if you look at an Auburn defensive line or a Georgia defensive line, you're going to have guys that are 330 pounds in the middle, and you're going to have them stuff on the run. Well, Ohio State is not doing that right now. Of course, they have Devon Hamilton and Robert Landers, bigger guys, but right now they're just not recruiting that type of guy. And those defensive linemen that you mentioned, they're big guys, but they're not like typical defensive tackles that you would see like in the NFL right now.
No, Larry's not these 6'4", 270-pound guys who can play inside and out. But there was one. I don't know if you saw him, but Tywan Malone from New Jersey is one of the largest juniors in high school I've ever seen in my life. I mean,
he's massive.
He was
he's massive.
so wide that, I mean, he was blocking like 3 people who were walking behind him I couldn't see because he was so wide. And he's a kid, 6'4", 310 pounds. And I'm telling you, this kid, by the time he gets to college, is going to be an absolute monster.
Well, maybe Larry does want one guy from every class that's kind of like that. Maybe he does want one guy from every other class that's like that. He doesn't really have one in this 2020 class. I guess you could say the kid from North Carolina. Sorry, his name's skipping me. But he's a pretty big guy. But maybe Larry is kind of saying, okay, we need at least one. You know, I need one guy in my room that can stuff the run.
Well, there's who you're talking about is Jacoby Cowan.
Jacoby Cowan, yeah.
And Cowan and Darion Henry are both in that 6'5", 270-pound range. And, you know, I don't know that they're really going to grow out into like a true one tech, but, you know, they're looking, like I said, flexibility is key for the Buckeyes on the defensive line, and they're going to keep growing from there. I want to talk a little bit more about the weekend and who we think could be a potential commitment down the line from this class. Or from this visit, I'm sorry. And there's a couple guys I want to start with, not speaking about in-state guys, because I do believe that Tegra Tashabola and Gabe Powers and Michael Hall will all end up joining Miyan Williams as commitments from this weekend, but they're all in-state. Other than that, I think that there's a few guys to really keep an eye on moving forward, and we'll move down that line real quick. Running back Evan Pryor, who we'll have an update on this week. He's one. Another one, tight end Jordan Dingle from Bowling Green, Kentucky. This is his 3rd visit he's made in the last 4 months. Then you have Trey Zune from Colorado, a 4-star offensive lineman from Fort Collins, Colorado. Also been to Ohio State 3 times, down to 3 schools, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Texas A&M. I think this weekend might have done a good job moving Ohio State ahead. But do the Buckeyes want him? I don't know. That's something that we're going to have to figure out. They're in a really weird position on the offensive line already because they have Ben Chrisman committed at tackle. And then there's J.C. Latham, who, again, if we're talking about a player that was just physically different, like a dude who like looked like a dude, J.C. Latham is incredibly big for a 16-year-old kid. 6'6", 295, 300 pounds. And his body is totally different than it was when he visited in April.
If you look at the sidelines and you see Paris Johnson, and then you look at another guy near him and he looks kind of the same size, that's J.C. Latham. Yeah. I mean, he's massive. I was very surprised with how big a 16-year-old kid. You look at him, you say, okay, yeah, that's an offensive lineman. You know that's not a defensive lineman. That's an offensive lineman. He's going to be. But all of those names are interesting. I made sure to see Evan Pryor on this visit, and Ohio State fans worried about that 2020 running back class, right? You've written about it numerous times. I actually wish we would have counted how many times you wrote about it just to kind of make a joke about it. I don't know if you'll have that same issue writing about it in 2021. Ohio State is very, very active with these 2021 running backs, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, if you look at what they've done with Pryor, then there's Donovan Edwards in Michigan, then there's Corey Kiner down in Cincinnati. There's Lavassier Carroll down at IMG Academy. There's a lot of guys that are in on very early.
Will Shipley,
who's really good friends with Evan Pryor. So there's a lot of things working, right now in 2021. But I don't want to get too far ahead there. But Bryce Steele, linebacker / safety from Virginia. It's another guy who I think from this weekend that could eventually be a commitment. He's going to actually go to visit Michigan next weekend. It's kind of interesting. Him, Aaron Armitage. We'll both be doing that. Rayshawn Benny, who's an offensive lineman from Detroit who visited. I assume he'll be at Michigan next week. A lot of these kids who watched Ohio State and Penn State play are going to be watching Ohio State play Michigan next week and be on the other sideline. So it's just one of those weird things about recruiting and how fascinating it is. So a couple other things, a little housekeeping. Julian Fleming did make the visit for the Penn State game wearing an Ohio Against the World hoodie sweatshirt, which, of course, rubbed some people the wrong way.
And it rubbed a lot of people the right way, too. I did notice that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so funny. These kids, there's all this talk about Julian and whether or not, he's going to secretly flip to Penn State, blah, blah, blah. And then to show up, make a middle of the night drive to come over to Ohio State to see the Buckeyes play Penn State, the school that everyone thinks he's going to flip to, and then to show up wearing that sweatshirt is a pretty great troll move.
And Birm, real quick, I don't want to get too far off track with this, but when you looked on the field, you saw the number 1 wide receiver in the class of 2017. Justin Shorter, right? 2017?
2018.
2018. Okay, you looked on the field and you saw the number one wide receiver in the class of 2018 have 2 or 3 catches, and it was the first time in a Big Ten game that he had that many catches.
Yeah.
And then you look on the other sideline, and there's Garrett Wilson, who's already the starting punt returner, and who's made some big plays and big moments for Ohio State this year. It's just, if Julian Fleming is watching that, it's pretty easy to see those kind of things, right? So I don't want to get too far ahead. I just wanted to, make that point known.
The development's there. It's obvious to see.
These recruits see that.
Yeah, exactly. And they see Chris Olave, and they see what's happened to, in the last few years with the wide receivers. And for Julian, the Justin Shorter usage as a freshman a year ago is one of the reasons why he turned away from Penn State. And then he comes to Ohio State and sees Chris Olave being the man, sees Garrett Wilson getting all this run now, sees a wide open wide receiver room down the road. And it's why the best receiver in Pennsylvania and the country, and the best receiver in Texas, and the best receiver out in the West Coast, and G. Scott, are all coming to Ohio State. So we could talk all night about recruiting stuff, and that's what we do here on Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast, brought to you by Lettermen Row. But that's going to wrap up this episode because it's getting long and there's too many things to talk about. So we'll keep talking about the Penn State visitor list as we meet up later this week. We'll preview the wide receiver group. And I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Spencer Holbrook, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Letterman Live, we've got the practice report, we got rapid reaction. Hey, and we got Buck IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Birm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.